Okay, so let me start with this. Do we see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's super nice to join you this afternoon or this evening. And I'd like to thank Daria for reaching out a couple of weeks ago through a mutual friend of ours. And it has been quite serendipitous that all these things have come together. I think I had visited the Diversity United exhibition just a few weeks ago. And so it's interesting that this event is happening within that and thinking about these issues pertaining to the EU. And yeah, so what I want to do is I'll be sort of starting very macro, you could say, at a almost at a widescreen scale of 20th and 21st century history. Then we'll be narrowing into the recent book and exhibition that I've worked on. And then the last part will focus on more specifically how we have engaged with emojis as a somehow hyper relevant and resonant kind of language and system of expressing new feelings that maybe don't have any other way of expressing themselves. So here we go. So my main focus over the last decade has been around how change is changing, because change keeps changing. And I'd like to show you how and why language is such an important element of this change. So let's first go back to 1967. This is Marshall Mcluhan, a Canadian professor of literature and media studies. He became very famous thanks to this book here on the right, whose title was The Medium is the Massage. The Medium is the Massage was produced, and that's, I think, an important word, produced by Jerome Agel in the middle, designed by Quentin Fure here on the left. And this book went on to become a mainstream cult success, selling over 1 million copies, supposedly. Now, Jerome Agel's idea for the book was that it would, quote, predict the present, predict the present. This is a phrase that ever since I discovered it a number of years ago, it stays lodged in my brain, and I find it extremely helpful to think about the traditional relationship between past, present, and future, and how those traditional relations have actually become something unfamiliar and new. What Jerome Agel did was compressed Marshall McLuhan's complex thoughts about electric media into something, quote, a 10-year-old can understand. And I also find this very inspiring. Marshall McLuhan, up till that point, had become a very well-known figure, but within academia. Arguably, he's one of really the founders of media theory. But he was known mostly to other academics through a number of extremely erudite, but also dense and hard, difficult to understand books that he'd written. And so Agel believed that these ideas needed to be distilled and presented in a way that would make them disseminate to a much, much broader audience, both in terms of scale, but also in terms of generation, from the very young to the very old. And Quentin Fiore, who was the graphic designer responsible for the extraordinary visuals of this book, which has gone on to become considered one of the classics of 20th century graphic design. So Quentin Fiore gave visual shape to these compressions, creating what he called a dialogue between the computer and the book. And remember, this is 1967. Almost nobody, certainly domestic, there were no domestic users of computers at this point. They were purely professional or military or corporate. So a dialogue between the computer and the book. And so the result was a tour through psychological, social, and emotional change. Fast forward now to 2015. Douglas Coupland, who is a Canadian author and artist, Ulrich Obrist, who is a Swiss, London-based curator and interviewer extraordinaire. Myself and the graphic designer Wayne Daly produced this book. The media, we consider it the medium as the massage, updated for the 21st century. We call this book The Age of Earthquakes, and the subtitle is A Guide to the Extreme Present. It was published by Penguin, who also published The Medium is the Massage back in 1967. The catalyst or the impetus for this book was the fact that Marshall McLuhan died in 1980. And although he seemed to have predicted the internet and the interconnected planetary network that the internet has produced, he never himself got to see the digital world that we now inhabit. So for The Age of Earthquakes, the text was something that we wrote together. And then how the images were sourced was through a process, what we call mind sourcing, where we sent our manuscript out to just over 35 to 40 different visual artists of different generations, different nationalities, all over the world, different media as well. And we asked them to send back images that responded to this text. And so what we ended up doing was producing a black and white paperback that was wired for eyes and fingers that are now more accustomed to swiping or scrolling, like I'm doing currently on my iPad. The Age of Earthquakes is a book that has swallowed the internet from the first half of the 2010s. So here's how the book starts, just to give you an idea of the tone, but also the relationship between image and text that we've set up. So have you maybe noticed that our lives are no longer feeling like stories? Our lives are becoming a lineup of tasks. Our sense of time is beginning to shrink. So as I said, the subtitle of the book is introduces a neologism, a new phrase, and that is the extreme present. So what is the extreme present? Well, this is the realization that the causes of the modern condition are not going away. The forces driving the current world will only accelerate. Indeed, we invented 28 new words and terms within the book. And that's because, and this is also inspired by Marshall McLuhan, and McLuhan said that one of the mistakes that mankind tends to make every time there is a new technology is that we use the language from a previous era to try and describe the new era. And when we do that, in a way, it's impossible for us to fully appreciate or absorb what is really happening in the new era. And so new realities always require new languages. new terminology, new taxonomies. So this is one of the 28 words that we invented. Proceleration, it's a noun, and it simply means the acceleration of acceleration. And so if you think of normal acceleration as being potentially something linear or something that might move along a certain kind of curve, proceleration is really more of a parabolic curve, because as time moves on, acceleration seems to accelerate. Now, one of the things that I would argue is that the pandemic has been procelerating the future into the present. So what we've all, to some or lesser or greater degree, experienced is that certain phenomena that were on the distant horizon, whether it's to do with how we travel, how we work, our concepts of what it means to have a good health or not, they've been telescoped into our present from much further away in the future. So maybe 10 years away, 15 years away, 20 years away. And so it's as though we have been procelerated into the future. And one of the things that Douglas has been saying is that the future and the present are in fact now the same thing. So the sum of these sensations is something that I call change vertigo. Now, change vertigo is that unsettling sense of drag, where the future arrives at a faster pace than our psychological, emotional, and political capabilities can cope with. If we now fast forward to the year 2016, what we learned then was that the 21st century's most valuable resource is you, with all your online behaviors, enriched data sets, and millions of meta data points. This Economist cover from 2017 said the world's most valuable resource, data and the new rules of competition. And so this is one of the, almost a truism over the last few years. Is data the new oil? Well, maybe, or maybe not. A couple of years after that was this Netflix documentary called The Great Hack. And this showed us how and why, in fact, our emotions are at the center of our daily news cycle. Everything today is engineered. Now, the 20th century, if we go back again, was dictated by fossil capitalism. There was oil, there was gas, there was coal, and these were all resources that were fracked from the sea or they were fracked from the ground. And of course, countries, nations, leaders who sat on huge amounts of these fossil resources would find themselves in geopolitical power, positions of power. Now, fast forward again to the 21st century, we've entered a new era. It has different names. Shoshana Zuboff calls it surveillance capitalism. We could call it data capitalism or even computational capitalism. But in fact, I prefer to call it emotional capitalism, because today's most valuable resources are your feelings and how those feelings are extracted, harvested, analyzed, commodified, and then weaponized in a myriad of ways that shape reality like never before. Now, all of this is the backdrop to our latest book, The Extreme Self. It's a new kind of graphic novel about whether individuality is morphing into something else. The images inside are portraits and self-portraits, this time sourced from over 70 contributors. And we broadened our reach again. So we have designers and fashion designers, musicians like Amnesia Scanner and Fatima Al-Qadiri, as well as technologists who have provided us with images. So the back of the book asks, actually states that if you're wondering why the inside of your head feels so strange these days, this book has the answers. So this is, I'm going to show you how the new book begins. And again, we're sort of narrowing the scope now, getting closer and closer to the present moment that we're inhabiting. So the 20th century was about what belongs to who. The 21st century is about who belongs to what. For thousands of years, Earth's resources have been extracted by bodies, most of whom were not free. But now our bodies and ourselves are being extracted. And mostly we offer it up for free. By merely existing, you're leaving a huge data smudge in the world, but it's not in the physical world. It's up in the cloud forever. And here on the right, you see a sample list of all the kinds of information trail that every single one of us leaves every second of the day, whether it's search history, biometric medical data, vacation details, speech patterns, school homework, photographs, of course, credit records, dietary dislikes, sexual trauma, facial and finger recognition, and food delivery history. The cloud is the new infinity. Feelings now legitimize lies. Could the expression of empathy be our new Turing test? So, what does this mean for the concept of individuality? And is the individual something unrecognizable to what he, she, or they were even 5 years ago? So we were wondering, do you still feel like an individual? 20 years ago, this question would have made no sense. Now, everybody knows what it means. We all know that we're changing inside our heads quickly, too quickly. Up until recently, people were simply people. Now we're turning into something else. We all feel it. We all know it. It's all happening faster than we thought. What if we need a new word to describe this thing that individuality is morphing into? You're now becoming your extreme self, and it's happening to you as you read these words. So that's just to bring you up to what we mean by this new phrase, the extreme self. In a way, it's a kind of place, you could almost say it's a placeholder that we employ to occupy the space that is where and what and how and why we are feeling the way that we're feeling today. And yeah, so what I'd like to do now is I've put together specific parts of or pages actually, or chapters of pages from the book that address themes that are relevant to current issues facing the EU, and no doubt will be points of discussion and contention in the session that you have in Berlin in a couple of days' time. I should add there are 13 chapters in our book, and it moves from the very much from the psychological to the social, the political, and then it ends with something like the eternal. So chapter 6 is called The New Crowd. And it starts with this injunction: you are multiplying. And one of the questions that we are interested in, and I think has become extremely palpable over the last 18 months or more, is who matters more, the individual or the crowd. And so I think, I mean, the pandemic, every aspect of the pandemic, whether people even believe that coronavirus is a real thing or not a real thing, all the way to the very heated topic of vaccination. And now we're seeing, this play out, I think, very spectacularly in the US, I think in particular, where they have, maybe they've reached almost the maximum number of people that they're who are willing to take the vaccine, and the rest are different kinds of anti-vaxxers. And so, we all of us now live in this kind of, this is an adaptation of a famous politigram that some of you may recognize from Twitter or Instagram, which traditionally maps out where everything sits between authoritarianism, the left, the right, and liberalism and democracy. But we've sort of redefined it in terms of me, you, us, them. And somehow every single issue today would fit somewhere within this matrix. And we're very much living through this time where, I mean, we've just had the anniversary of 9/11, and one of the, I think, the famous declarations after 9/11 by George W. Bush was when he declared in very chilling terms, you're either with us or against us, splitting the world essentially in two, friend and enemy. And so I think the whole idea of the crowd today is suffused with all these extremely charged vectors of people who consider themselves part of one tribe and everybody else that's part of other tribes, etc. So chapter 7 is called Micro-Othering, Microfascism. You are triggered. So what is microfascism? Well, microfascism is when online aggression spills into the real world aggression, tiny or large acts of aggression and confrontation used to define, deplatform, and limit the agency of others. Microfascism has turned the right into a circus act to the disgust of the left. Outrage culture feels like the loudest form of culture today. It's actually astonishing how much the left and right have in common. And again, we could pull up a different diagram here. It would be the horseshoe theory of the political spectrum, that in fact politicality is not a straight line with the left and the right somehow defining those two polarities, but that in fact it's a horseshoe, or maybe even more esoteric if you know about Ouroboros, the mythical snake that is constantly swallowing its tail. I think, again, since 2015, 2016, we've seen how, to a large extent, the traditional vocabulary of left and right has become, it seems, increasingly eclipsed by different forms of political affiliation and political language. Outrage is good for business. How much news do you digest in a day? How much did you used to digest? Outrage is fun. You appear virtuous for doing pretty much nothing. It's like the Diet Coke of politics, which then takes us to the next chapter, which is very much related, which we call virtue power. You are righteous. And this is this whole notion that it's not enough to possess or have virtue today. You have to display that you have it. And so here we're, of course, thinking about performative politics, social media activism. Some of you may have heard of a new TV show that's about to drop in America called The Activist, which is getting a huge amount of criticism, but also just outright ridicule made of it. It's a program that's based on formats like the Apprentice or the X Factor, but instead of entrepreneurs or singers, you have 5 activists who have to compete with each other, and then are judged by 3 celebrity judges, all of whom have no experience with activism whatsoever. And in the end, one of these activists will win and have access to funding. And so, to me, this is the extreme articulation of this idea of performative activism becoming a form of entertainment. So we say that the extreme self has a low trigger threshold. And so triggering is one of these words that has also become, I think, increasingly familiar. I mean, I can only speak about the Anglo-Saxon world. Those of you from other countries could either back me up here, or maybe it hasn't necessarily happened there yet, but I think it has. But this idea of being triggered by something that you read, something that you see, an offhand comment that somebody makes, and that triggering then unleashes a kind of deluge or a counter articulation, a counter expression, and it goes back and forth all the time, escalating the sort of tension level. And the space where this happens mostly is the comment section. And actually, one of the chapters of the book is called "The Comment Section is the Real World." And then the last chapter I want to bring up here, because this came up in my pre lecture discussion with Daria. Of course, one can't think about Europe, the future of Europe, without, of course, always thinking about the future of what we mean by democracy, what we've meant in the past, what it might mean in the future. So we have a chapter called "The Ends of Democracy." Here it says, "You are over-empowered." And we claim that we're now deep into the terminal phase of democracy. This phase involves voting in leaders whose primary goal is to dismantle democracy. I won't name names. I think you may all have a good idea who I might be referring to here. Question: is a benevolent dictator better than a bad democracy? Answer: is that the only choice I've got? One of the, I think, interesting things that happened at the very early part of the pandemic, particularly during the early lockdown, was a very genuine question about whether authoritarian non-democracies were outperforming democracies when it came to managing public health, managing sort of social practices. I mean, I partly live in Dubai, in the UAE, so I've very much lived through that experience, and it was very, very different to the country where I'm otherwise from, where I'm speaking to you from at the moment, which is the United Kingdom. And and the differences were very, very stark in terms of the sovereignty of every individual freedom versus the sovereignty of the state, you could say. And one of the last pages I want to share here in relation to this question of the future of democracy: groups of people usually make dreadful decisions. The majority can no longer be trusted. Now, we have to think of this in terms of the fact that we've seen increasingly elections come down to a 51% and 49% result. That certainly was the case for the referendum in the UK to leave the EU. But of course, that 51% is actually, I mean, let's say 60% of the country vote ultimately. So that 51% is actually more like 37% roughly. So let's say 37% of a country which is a minority, is making these immense democratic decisions moving forward. Many of which, like the Brexit referendum, feel irreversible as opposed to normal parliamentary democratic vote. Okay, and this is the last section of my talk. And it brings us really right up to the topic, the specific topic at hand, which is that of emojis as a form of contemporary communication, expression, language, indeed even politics, maybe. And so I want to share with you why I've been interested in them and how they've appeared in these recent projects that I've been working on. I don't know, how many of you know about Emoji Tracker, but it's really one of my favorite things on earth. It's a website. Just put in emojitracker.com, and what you see is a live tracking of emojis as they're being used on Twitter at that very specific moment. And it's almost like a cross section through how the Twitter sphere is feeling every second. And so when it flashes green, that's when it's being used. So in the top left-hand corner is the most popular emoji, which is the laughing, crying one. And then to its right is the heart, then the crying one to the right. And you can, what's really fascinating, this keeps scrolling. And then in a way, even maybe equally as interesting, at the bottom of the page, you see the least popular, the least used emojis, like the ski lift, for example. But what I love about this, again, is, as I say, it is like this cross-section through how people are feeling or expressing themselves on this specific social media platform. And of course, the thing about emojis is that they take us back to the very beginnings of language, particularly the beginnings of written language. And again, those of you who are interested, I urge you to read Marshall Mcluhan, because his whole research is about these seismic transformations when humanity shifts from an oral to a written, and then from a pictographic to an abstracted alphabet society, from books being handwritten to then becoming mass-produced by Gutenberg in the 15th century. And so, I mean, I find it very interesting if we look at the emojis here, their similarity to something like cuneiform, which is one of the very early form of written languages that are many thousands of years old, back to the Babylonian and the Assyrian times. So our book has also appeared as an exhibition, initially at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto, and then more recently at the Jameel Art Center in Dubai. And so as we used emojis, they leapt off the screen and then they entered into the exhibition space. So this is how the visitor was greeted in MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto. This is the introduction text, and right in front of it is this emoji hole, which was nearly 3 meters wide. And so this sense of one of the things I'm very interested in is when things that we're used to seeing on the screen somehow jump out from the screen into IRL space. So the exhibition had this feeling to it. So we started with this huge emoji hole. This was a commission by an artist called Yuri Patterson. And Yuri was very interested in the different eye emojis, and the fact that, as we saw with Emoji Tracker, emojis are, they're not only these kind of cute graphic language forms that we use, but they have a surveillance aspect to them. They have an analytic aspect to them. There are marketing companies who are also going through and constantly tracking, like we saw in Emoji Tracker, which emojis are being used when. And again, what they're doing is they're sort of taking the emotional pulse of that moment. And so what Yuri did here was he took the four or five main eye emojis from the five main social media platforms, and then put them into what's called an array feature in Photoshop. And that array feature uses a very simple, basic form of artificial intelligence to create this non-repetitive pattern made out of these eyes. And so what you have is this like wallpaper of eyes looking at you. But also because of this AI, it's also created these blemishes, these blips of these deformations. And so you have all these different kinds of themes coming together in this, what looks superficially to be something, again, quite cute, but it actually feels more and more sinister the more you look at it. At Jameel in Dubai, we actually lined the inside of the elevator with Yuri's wallpaper, and there was a mirror on this side, so it also created this like hyperreal space where you became wrapped up in these eyes. We've also been creating merchandise. We've created this webcam cover. And so we put these cartoon eyes on the front. And so this slides to the side, so you can open your webcam camera lens or close it. And this was very much inspired by, if you've ever seen Citizen 4, the documentary about Edward Snowden. You'll remember at the very beginning, he's in a hotel room in Hong Kong. And he, because of course he worked in cybersecurity, and he knew way before all of us that laptop cameras are, in a sense, always on. And so he had it covered, and then he uses this blanket to create kind of obscurity and anonymity. And so when I thought this, all of Edward Snowden's issues with his webcam could be dealt with if he was to get hold of one of these. At MoCA Toronto, we made a light box at the back of the museum here on the left. And what you see here, so it's one of the phrases from the book, what is the opposite of you? But you can see we've replaced some of the letters with emojis. And so, this goes back to, again, that what I was just saying about early forms of writing. The very first form of writing, of course, were pictographic. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs are the most well-known. And so there was a time when what was being said and how it was being said sort of coincided. And so we thought this was a kind of nice way to refer to that. But then what we've been doing since then is try to develop our own new kinds of emojis, our own new kinds of emoji languages. And this speaks to very much to the fact that if someone were to ask you today, how are you? Or if they were to ask me, how am I? My real answer would be something like, well, I'm 30% anxious. I am 45% numb, and the rest I feel crushing void, something. So our emotions today, because of procelerated technology, are in fact not simple, they're complex. And we're often feeling several emotions at the same time. And so what we developed with Wayne Daly, our graphic designer, over the last couple of years, are new kinds of emojis that speak to this complex emotional architecture that we now all are part of. And so what you can see here are the three constitutive emojis on the left, the head exploding, the drop, which often is there as this kind of sweat drop, and then this hole, which I certainly use a lot as a shorthand for like existential doom almost. And then you can see on the right this like composite of these individual elements creating a new hybrid. And I'll just share different ways in which we have implemented this. So in at Jameel, we printed out this emoji nearly 4 meters by 4 meters, and we stuck it high up on the wall. So as you entered into the room, this was what you were confronted with, and again, we as part of our merch line, we made this this pin based on this new emoji as well, and really coming right up to the very recent present, you could say. For the Jameel show and for the book, we developed a new set of emojis with Wayne. And Wayne came up with this concept, which we just immediately found extremely captivating and but also accurate. I think we had at least one Russian person on the in the group in the audience, but I'm sure you're all aware of the famous Matryoshka dolls, the Russian dolls, which are a set of nestling figures that get smaller and smaller, and they all reside within each other. And Wayne said, well, actually, maybe this is kind of this could be an interesting way for us to depict this sense of nestled simultaneous emotions that are happening at the same time. And so here you could see that there's almost infinite number of variations and combinations. And you could read this, you know, there are different ways of reading this, of course, but you could say here on the top left, you know, I'm smiling on the outside, I'm vaguely nervous on the inside, but at the unconscious level, I'm losing my shit, right? And the bottom right, you'll see the Earth, and it's actually also it's essentially how the Earth is geologically organized as well. So that was another source of inspiration for Wayne. And this has become the image.
Hello, Shumon. I think we've lost you. Let me write him a message. Can you all hear? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. Let me call him on the phone, maybe. Maybe that's all on purpose to confuse us after this fascinating talk. So I can't reach him. I hope he's okay. I'm a little bit overwhelmed right now. Not so sure what I should do. Let's wait maybe another minute.
There was a blackout today in Germany as well, so maybe that's the problem in the UK as well. But I don't know.
Okay.
Should we?
Just to show you that we got to create this huge banner at the Jameel Art Center in Dubai, where we placed our new emoji on our new political compass. And so this acted as a kind of, in a way, an advertisement, you could say, but a very oblique, enigmatic advertisement to give a sense of what was on the inside of the museum to everybody that was on the outside. And the very last slide I want to share is the last thing that you experienced at the exhibition. So the whole emoji that was on the floor and horizontal in Toronto, we now turned 90 degrees and put onto the wall. And so, and this spoke to the fact that the final chapter of the book and the exhibition is called Towards the End. And this is about the fact that we are now increasingly immortal whilst being mortal at the same time. So the data trails, the histories that are stored in the cloud may well outlive every single one of us. And so this whole emoji at the end was a kind of allegory, you could say, to a portal of that would take you either to the future or to the past or to anywhere that isn't here today. So that's the end presentation. So let me stop sharing. Okay.
Fantastic. That was fascinating. Thank you so much, Shumon. I'm still a little bit flashed. It's great. So I would like to maybe have the participants to ask some questions.
Yes.
I could go first. If anyone has wants to go first, please go ahead. Otherwise, I've noted down a few questions for Shumon as well. Anyone wants to go first with a question?
Hey, yeah, I can start with a question. Hello, Shumon.
Hey, Maxim.
I want to ask, have you already dived into the mechanisms of the emoji consortium? Because I think it is very interesting to see that there's a committee that decides year by year which emotions or like which new emojis are on the uprise, what is important to feel, what is important emotion to put into the catalog.
Yeah.
So I did it. I just want to know, when we talk about this kind of new medium of emojis in the realm of the emotional, who controls or dictates the parameters, like the horizon of what's possible and what's not?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that would be obviously one one could do a very scholarly lecture about the history of emojis and emoticons, which obviously we don't have time to do today, but those of you who don't know, I mean, they essentially emerged from Japan, from Docomo in the 1990s, which is, you know, one of the major Japanese telecommunications companies. And maybe we shouldn't be surprised that Japan is the home of this kind of graphic language, because of course we have, I mean, it's by no accident that Los Angeles in Blade Runner, as it's imagined in 2019, back in 1982, was based essentially Tokyo in 1985. You know, Japan, through also, I mean, the Japanese language, the kanji, has that pictographic aspect to it already. You then have this whole history for hundreds of years, which then culminates in things like manga and the mainstreaming of comics and comic books, right? So I think Japanese culture and Japanese language has been extremely fluent in moving between image and text, or treating one as the other. And so Docomo then invented these emoticons, and I think it's important to make the distinction, isn't it? Those of you who are old enough will remember that, you know, how we used to initially put them together were through combinations of other symbols, the simplest being the colon followed by the right bracket, for example. And so using the existing parameters, you know, Docomo was able to make these slightly more complex emoticons. And then this is really the beginning. And then later they then became more graphically, you could say, benedicted into emojis. But like you said, Maxim, there's a very centralized, I mean, it's Unicode, it's the Unicode consortium. There's an interesting documentary on BBC Sounds about a number of people who wanted to introduce new emojis, and that takes you through the process of how you do this, right? And it ostensibly it is open. There are lobbyists. You lobby the Unicode consortium, and if you can garner enough momentum, ultimately, then you know, yeah. But the interesting thing is that it still is a kind of like in the activist or the X Factor. You know, you have these celebrity jurors. The Unicode consortium is not. It's still a private and anonymous to us group of individuals who ultimately decide. And so, and I think this has definitely become part of the kind of social discourse, I think, around emojis. But also, I think the reason that we've seen the explosion of, let's say, I mean, to bring the word diversity into this, right? Because, of course, the original set of emojis, because they have that provenance, you know, were considered to be, yeah, not racially inclusive, not sexually inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. And now we've got, I mean, those of you who know the new Drake album that dropped a week ago, you know, has a matrix of polyracial pregnant women emojis, right? And then somebody's already riffed on this with like the male pregnant emoji versions of this, etc. So we're now seeing. I mean, we crossed this line, I think, a few years ago of the, you know, the politics of hyperdiversity, of wokeness, of making sure that every single gender permutation, You know, it's not just like a man and a woman getting like a heteronormative couple. You now have thruples. You know, you have to make sure that you can represent non-binary. You know, so it's really interesting because, of course, ultimately, I mean, every language system, no matter how complex it is finite, no? And you could argue that, but reality is infinite. And so I think what we're seeing is, I mean, the original emoji set was very, very limited. No? It was very, very limited. And maybe that was part of its charm. And maybe that was also part of why it was so universal. Daria and I were talking about universalism before you joined us, and I think there was something again maybe more encompassing, arguably, when the emoji set was more limited. But now, of course, we live in a time, rightfully, where everybody wants to see appropriate kinds of representation. And so
You're breaking up. Okay, it seems we lost him again. There he is.
Hi.
Hello. We've lost you.
Yes. No, I guess, I mean, I don't want to go on too long, but I think, I mean, Maxim just put some, I think, interesting links in the chat.
Okay.
And I would drive you to, I mean, I can find the radio podcast, and I'll share it with you, Daria, and you could share it with everyone else.
I will.
But it's actually a really good overview about this whole tension, you could say, between an almost infinitely pluralistic reality and a very centralized system of governance around emojis.
Sorry, but is that not also a representative of the tech world? Because you have Facebook, and everything which happens on Facebook is decided by Mark Zuckerberg, or everything which happens on Twitter is decided. So we have a few individuals basically leading or dominating or governing our social or our interactions, whether it's with the language of emojis or whether it's with words and sentences which we post on social media platforms.
No, absolutely. And I think obviously one of the seductive myths and illusions, of course, of any social media platform comes from the founding principle of the web, particularly from Tim Berners-Lee back in 1989. That it would be genuinely open to everybody, and that it was a kind of utopia of democratic accessibility. But in fact, I mean, an interesting thing, on the 30th anniversary of the internet 2 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee actually said, you know what? If I could, I would take back my invention, because this is, he said, this is not what I intended. Because instead of, more and more decentralization, of course, what we've seen is just more and more concentration and centralization. And you talk about the big five in Silicon Valley, but then we also have to talk about the equivalents in China. And in fact, the internet is increasingly becoming a collection of intranets, no? So they're nationally governed, either state or private controlled closed communication systems. And I mean, I won't go into this too much, but the reason we have something like the prospect of Web3 and a new internet that will be built on the blockchain is precisely as to address what you've just described, Daria. And I am excited. I'm critical as well because but it's clearly been the case that
a lot of people, I think, see for the biggest issue of today is that blockchain could eventually be a solution also for climate change in terms of tracking CO2 footprints, etc. So there are a lot of kind of new solutions maybe on the horizon. But we yet have to see them basically coming into play.
Yes.
I think right now we're still moving in the realm.
Yeah, no, I agree. But one of the things that would be said.
Okay, we lost him again. It's very unfortunate. Let's wait maybe another minute. Okay, he's back.
Sorry, I'm obviously having a tech meltdown moment.
That's fine. You were saying, would you like to answer to that question again?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. Well, no, I think blockchain proselytizers would say, well, we are with the blockchain where the internet was in maybe 1994 or 95, right? So we're very early, and so if we were to be able to time travel, and that's why we have to be careful about making these comparisons, because it took the internet a certain a length of time to arrive where it is. And even though the blockchain and blockchain development moves are, I think, even much faster than like Web 1 and Web 2, it's still arguably in a kind of proto phase. And so I agree. I mean, we have to wait and see, I think.
Would you see that could provide also a solution for the ethical implications we see social media has had on our opinions and on the outrage economy, on the magnitude of the perception gaps we have among each other, and also on the issue that we're becoming not more informed but rather more distorted as we kind of go along and move around and spending or paying attention to social media?
Look, I don't actually see these necessarily as technological problems, but rather like problems of humanity. And technology can make things better or worse, but they can't necessarily fix our humanity, right? So whilst like I wouldn't want to, like in my presentation, if I had more time, then I would say, and this is why Marshall McLuhan is so important, because he analyzed the cycles from history to show us the fact that many times when we think something new is happening, it's actually happened before. But it's just, I mean, in the first book, we say, technology changes, but humanity stays the same. So, the arrival of radio, like I think it's very difficult for us to imagine how violent the arrival of radio was, particularly for religious for religious bodies, and same with television. Like there was this idea of the disassociated body voice was something, that belonged to the devil or to darkness or something. I'm old enough to remember the moral outrage around, things that happened on TV. It seems so weird to now, because TV is like Dead Scroll or something. But these things have always happened, and I think this is why it's important for us to learn from history, to educate ourselves about these cycles. And but perhaps the thing that is maybe more extreme than ever before, because let's take the comparison with television. When I grew up the early part of my life in England, we had four TV channels, and many countries may have had only one TV channel. Daria, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well. I think the others too. Yeah?
Yes.
We can hear you. Can you hear?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Shumon. Okay, I guess we know the drill. He's coming back in a second. There he is.
Oh dear. I'm sorry about that. Clearly having a pipeline issue. No, maybe the last thing I'll say about this is this is the most decentralized that information has ever been. Because traditionally speaking, information had to go through centralized gatekeepers. So whether it was a newspaper or a television station, but now every single one of us, every single one of you has the option of being their own broadcast center, right? And this multiplies the complexity of information and disinformation. But the thing is, and there was a scientific study done about this, which is very interesting, that they calculated that disinformation travels 7 times faster than information. And the thing about disinformation is it's sticky. So even once it's been disproved, let's say, it doesn't matter because it's already had its effect. It leaves a kind of residue in the brain, right? And this is what I mean by the ends of consensus reality. And for me, this is the great, I think one of the great challenges of today. Up there with the climate crisis and all of these things, because the minute we are not able to share reality, then what chance do we have on addressing or fixing that reality, right? Like you can only agree to take action if you share the sense that there is something wrong. Now, if only half the planet thinks that there's climate crisis and the other don't, and that number goes up, then why would there be any action for climate or concerted collective action? So in that sense, I think we are in a new age, and it is very, very worrying. I don't think the blockchain fixes that, right? Because you could argue, well, then actually what the blockchain does is just create even more decentralization and even less accountability, right? So I don't see the blockchain solving consensus crisis necessarily. you know.
But how do we emerge from this? Because also here in Germany right now, we have an election coming up. And I see on the election posters, it's scary actually how little there is talk about current issues, about important issues. It just seems that everyone is just trying to keep it as low profile as possible, not to, you know, not to kind of enrage, not to get the wrong kind of attention. So it's very timid and just irrelevant, completely irrelevant messaging. And that's scary. I think that's scary for democracy, because how am I supposed to make a decision on who to vote for? If nothing speaks to me, if nothing relevant is actually being discussed.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, I always say that the health of a democracy is directly measured by how well its citizens are educated and informed, right? And so, which is why the first thing any fascist or autocratic state does is go straight back to school. You know, it will change the textbooks, it will change history, it will change, you know, you have to start the brainwashing at a very, very early age. Now, I think what we've been undergoing over the last 5-6 years is, in a way, something of a similar scale. You could say it's a process of extreme de-education. I mean, some people would say it's re-education, but I'd say it's de-education, you know? Because, and again, the pandemic, coronavirus, I think, is an exemplary case study for this. Because, I mean, I remember months ago seeing a courtroom situation in Florida, and they're literally, you know, soccer moms, as they're called in that part of the world, you know, getting up and adamantly claiming that they know more about viruses than virologists or epidemiologists do, right? Now, there was nothing ironic about this. This is what they believe, you know, and this is where we are, and this is deep. It's deeply. I mean, for any of. I'm going to make an assumption that we're all somehow, you know, scientific empiricists here. We believe in the law of empirical science, rule-based science, etc., and that, you know, there's cause and that there's effect. You can measure these things. You know, I'm going to make that assumption. If anybody's not, I apologize. But in a way, you know, it's like our view of reality is now simply one alternative view of reality. It doesn't necessarily have greater purchase. It doesn't have greater automatic authority over anything else. And this is very, very, it's difficult not to be scared about this. And what you just described, Daria, is I think an effect of that, isn't it? Because instead of raising the bar of social discourse higher, it's being lowered ultimately. I think also to appeal, I mean, to not alienate as many people as possible, right? But there is just this sense of, you know, of moving extremely cautiously so as not to, you know, not to upset anybody with your belief in certain facts, let's say. It's as though facts have become, you know, one of the most combustive battlefields there is today, you know, and it's this kind of I mean, a lot of people have said, you know, they blame postmodernists from the 1980s. It's like post-structuralist relativism that's now been adopted by the far right, whatever. But we are seeing the the corrosive effects of a reality that has broken into infinite numbers of relative realities.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that, I mean, that's why we have this chapter called The Ends of Democracy in the book. I mean, this is why, you know, how every single one of us feels, right, has telescopes and has this scale effect on something like democracy. I mean, for those of us who live in democracies or who are active in democracies, there's a very, very, you know, there's a direct relationship between these things.
Mm.
And I want to quickly ask, do you think that democracy is possible or no? I mean, like nowadays we can see it even more bright that like all of the opinions which we have, they are it's kind of brainwashing. Like it's what you believe is what are your news, or like what is your agenda, or like what's your source on information. Even if you think that you are thinking critically, let's say, and you have different sources of news or whatever, but still, is it possible or no? Because there's like people, because like democracy is the power of people, and but like most of the people, they consume like really what do they consume? Like what are their sources, and like how we can like even think about if democracy is possible or not? Like in let's say in the best future, if everybody will be educated or so, but like if you're speaking about education, then there have to be like some source of censorship which like will I don't know, decide what is good or what is bad. Sorry, he's left. Yes. Hello. Did you hear the last?
Yeah, could you just repeat the last bit? I think it dropped out. Sorry, just the very last part. Yeah.
Well, I think that you kind of got the question, like if it's possible or not, the democracy, or maybe it can be something different, because most of the people that don't even think about like the global issues or so, they just if they live in comfort or so, that's like, if they like the most value for them is like to be in comfort and to be safe, and not to think about global issues. And so yeah, it's like really broad question. You have
no. I mean, I don't, you know, I try not to be an alarmist, and I try not to fall prey into like a dead end of pessimism, because I think morally that's questionable. And I mean, I have two answers. You know, one answer would be, I think it's in great jeopardy. I think it's under great threat. As I just said, I think a democracy the health of a democracy is measured directly by the level of education and informedness of its people. What happens when there is more disinformation than information, right? And that's where we are increasingly. So if that's the case, then you know, one could say in very you know, calm, analytical terms that yes, democracy is under a great threat, you know, and because as we've seen, and whether it's Trump, Bolsonaro, Orban in Hungary, Modi, etc., etc. I mean, I call these leaders democratically elected authoritarians. And why is it that they're able to be so successful? it's because they, and this speaks to what Dario was just saying, they realize that the pathway to political success and power today is not really policy making. It's narrative making. And there's a really great book, it came out 2 years ago, it's called Narrative Economics, Princeton University Press. And you know, this is it. Everything is, you know, we are, you know, it's said that we are, you know, humans are 70% water and we're this much nitrogen and carbon, but maybe we're 99% stories. And you know, so the things that seduce us today are the stories that we want to either hear or we want to be part of. And because of this networked, you know, decentralized peer-to-peer network communication infrastructure, which means that my pocket is directly linked to your pocket, your pocket, your pocket, your pocket. You know, the things that travel the most and the best are the people who know how to, you know, how to capitalize on that. And they're the ones that can tell the most powerful stories today. Now, powerful stories are not necessarily the most nuanced stories, right? If you look at the most successful films of all time, it's not Ingmar Bergman or Tarkovsky, right? It's The Lion King and it's Titanic, etc. So simple stories, by and large, travel better, faster, they have more impact. And so what we're seeing now is a kind of politics that, that yes, has to be reduced in its complexity in order that it can have that like emotional impact, I think. And the emotional impact, I would argue, is the #1 priority. Not whether, you know, this is good for the country or it's good for the planet or it's good for you or me or it's good for the poor. It's literally, you know, I mean, it's to see it, you know, in a Foucauldian, you know, how does power, how does power sustain itself and collect more power ultimately? And you know, we've seen this now in from Xi Jinping in China, who's changed the rules, so he's effectively the new Mao, right? Like he's going to be chairman indefinitely. We've seen it with Putin, you know. I mean, this is one of the, you know, it's 101 of democratic distortion. You change the mechanics of how long you can be a leader for, no? And but you do that by telling a story, because one of the stories that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party have been saying now for 100 years is that, you know, the problem with democracy is that you can't guarantee long-term planning, because every 4 or 5 years you'll get a change and a swing to the opposite, right? So I think I mean, from a narrative perspective, the story that the Chinese Communist Party have been able to tell is a very powerful story, no? Because who else is able to say or is able to describe a 5, 10, 15, 30-year plan? Democracies can't do that. Imagine you know, anybody, a presidential leader saying, well, I have this plan for 30 years. You'd be like, what? Like, you know, they would not be, you can only actually plan for the next year or 2 maximum, you know? And so, so I think, you know, this is, I agree with you. My counter, the last thing I would say counter to that would be that every new technology, a new media format is a shock to the first generation that encounters it. But every subsequent generation that is born into it they don't necessarily experience the same shock. And their neurology, I think, will be more attuned and less extremely like catastrophically wired than ours. So my hope is, I mean, we're only, well, we're 14 years since the iPhone. We are not even a decade from when social media, you know, left our computers and entered into our pockets. We are so early. And of course, those of us who have had to adjust to that are finding it very difficult. We found it very difficult. But does somebody who's 10 years old, somebody who's 5 years old now find the same difficulty? I don't know. I hope not, you know. So hopefully the things that are causing these shocks to us now will cause less shocks, you know, as more of us get older and more of us die and new generations take over. I mean, that would be my optimistic response to your question, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to get to Simon's question. He put a very interesting question in the chat. Simon, would you like to ask your question to Shumon?
Yes, of course. So my question is, since we're talking about
Okay.
Did we lose him?
Another one dropping out. Simon, we can't hear you.
hearing me, or is my internet down?
No, now I can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So, and the third power is a smart power, which means in times of more and more complexity in the world, it's a powerful tool or talent to be able to explain it to the people, the complexity of the issues. And nobody is really able to do it. And that is why populists are so successful, because they just, well, they just don't get to the complexity and give easy answers, and people get stuck to that. So my question is if there is any chance to get to the smart power in a way where, well, I mean, we can't make everyone in the world super smart and super intellectual. So does that mean when problems get more complex, populists will always get more successful, or is there a way out?
Very good question. Well,
I mean, this is it. Again, we go. Something that it only dawned on me in the last couple of years is that if you look at particularly the 20th century, fascist leaders tend to come to power in democracies. Fascists are elected. Socialists, Marxists usually come to power through a revolution or a coup. They're not voted in. Now, when I realized that, you know, whether it's Hitler, Mussolini, you know, etc., it's my head did the head explode emoji, and it suggests that there is an intimate relationship between fascism and democracy, which is not to say that democracy is fascist, rather that fascism understands how to use democracy. And it does it precisely in the way that you just described, Simone. It replaces a reality of nuance with a blunt binary reality. Again, you're either with us or against us. You're from here or you're not from here. You're the same skin color, you're the same sexuality, or you're not, right? And this is where, I mean, I go back to are some of these problems hardwired in our humanity? You know, what is it about reduced complexity that seems so seductive for so many people, you know? And that is because, like, complexity, like, if you have to read, you know, Harry Potter or Marcel Proust, it will demand different things from your brain, you know? And nuance, difficulty is work. It's a kind of work, you know? It's emotional labor, it's social labor, it's communitarian labor, arguably. Binaries they're just a lot less effort, I think. And I think one of the things that, you know, again, every fascist demagogue, it's their first thing that they reach out to is, you know, creating a sense of kinship through the invention of a common enemy. And you know, for Modi, it's the Muslims. You know, for Trump, there were very many. But my only hope would be that we get past this shock phase of the digitization of life, and we enter into the next phase, which is when information can wage a revenge on disinformation, and we can return back to, not back, I mean, I don't want to suggest we go back to anything, but that we move forward to a space where, you know, empirically drawn truth and facts are able to present themselves with a kind of seductive force that I think they have lost in the last few years. How that happens, I really don't know. Look, I think the only way is that I'm hoping that we're going through an extremely volatile transition phase, but that we'll come out of it. Now, I can't guarantee that, but I have to have some hope. And it did happen with other media. I mean, when Gutenberg, you know, and the printing press happened, I mean, for a start, it took 100 years to see the effects of the printing press geopolitically on the world. But, you know, we know that the impact that had on the Christian church, for example. And therefore, given that the Christian church was the main source of power, shaping of reality in the Western world, you know, we saw the fallout. It took a long time. I don't think it depends, you know, how you would judge that would depend maybe where you belonged in that timeline. Were you part of the power that, you know, ruled before the printing press came? Because then your reality would have been taken away from you. So you would see that as a negative. But what if you were on the other side? Then you would see it as a positive, right? So I am worried, but I can't give up hope, I think.
Thank you so much, Shumon. We almost reached 2 hours. I think I'm going to wrap up here now. I could go on for another 2 hours, but unfortunately we have to stop at some point. And unfortunately you won't be with us, but I hope there will be an opportunity where you maybe can visit us for one of our seminars, and we would love to hear more from you. So thank you so much, Shumon, to you, and thank you everyone who tuned in and who stayed till the very end.
Thank you to the survivors. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay. So have a good evening, everybody. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. And thank you so much for your attention and for listening in. And thank you foremost to you, Shumon, of course, for your time and this wonderful lecture. It was great. It was really fascinating.
You're more than welcome, and thank you for your questions. And I'm sorry I can't be there on Wednesday. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic day, but I hope next time we can do this without my internet connection constantly ruining things. But thank you again, and it's been a pleasure meeting you all. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting conversation, and it was extremely interesting presentation. Now I really want to have this book.
Yes, please go and buy the book. You won't regret it.
I really recommend it. I have it already, so
yeah.
You can...
Actually, it's because our publisher is German, from Cologne, but it's well distributed in Berlin. So if you certainly find any of the Walter Koenig bookshops, at most of the museums, you'll find it there. But yeah, if you see it, have a look, and if you like it, buy it. And next time I'll happily sign it for you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.